Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of trade webinars to celebrate the BCC's Year of Trade. So far, we've had some really fascinating discussions around some of the key topics flowing from the UK's exit from the European Union and the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And today we are focusing on a discrete, very interesting, quite knotty topic to do with the protocol and specifically NIGB trade. So it's a really interesting subject. It's fair to say it's one of the fast moving areas of public policy, to put it mildly, whereas for decades trade policy moved in increments and millimeters. Now it moves a wee bit quicker. And so the practical upshot of that is that what we're saying now might be out of date at the end of the recording, or certainly by next week. And I think it's important to note this is going to be a recording. So this will be available on the YouTube, so no one need take any contemporaneous notes, although I will probably be scribbling a few ideas. So good is the quality of our panel. Please do put questions in the Q&A box. So far, we've managed to do a decent fist of answering quite a few of them. I'm afraid to say we can't answer all of them just because there tend to be so many, but we will try and get through the biggest issues, the most difficult stuff, and we will put each of our panelists absolutely on their mettle, because otherwise this is less fun than it might otherwise be. So I'm going to come over to the panelists in a second and ask them just to introduce themselves and speak for a couple of minutes of their observations of the first 6 weeks or so of the new trading arrangements. My lord, doesn't time fly? But before I do that, I just want to welcome everybody who's on the call. I can see we've got nearly 200 participants, which is a really, really good result. And I think a testament to the breadth and quality of engagement we have across the 53 UK chambers and more than 70 international chambers that form our global business network. So without further ado, I'm going to come to each of the three panelists in turn and just ask them to introduce themselves and say a few words. Starting with a very good ex-colleague of mine, famous from Twitter, ITN News, and not only for the hat, but the searing quality of his analysis. We have Aiden Connolly. Mr. Connolly, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and lovely to see you, and thank you for the invitation. I am going to quickly rattle through where we are and where we need to get to and what the challenges are going to be. But firstly, what I want to do is outline why Northern Ireland is different when it comes to retail. I'm the director of the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, which represents the majority of retail in Northern Ireland, especially that GB to NI trade. And also I'm the convener of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, which was set up about this time last year, covers about 90% of business in Northern Ireland. And it came together to look at how we can make things work for Northern Ireland while leaving the EU. So why is Northern Ireland different? Well, for the consumer and for retail, there really is, we're at the end of the supply chain. We already have between 12 and 18 hours less shelf life than other places than Bolton or Birmingham, quite simply because of the geography. We are at the end of the supply chain. As well as that, for Northern Ireland consumers, we have half of the discretionary income of Great British households. That means that any sort of fluctuations in price, any of those cost rises, we cannot afford to absorb. And where there is friction, should that be because of new systems, should it be because of checks, should it even be because of delays, where there is friction, it's a very, very simple equation. Friction equals cost. And Northern Ireland consumers can't afford to absorb that. But then again, neither can the retail industry. It's a very, very low profit margin, high volume industry. Up until quarter four, 2018, we had that wonderful 5 years of consumer deflation. And what that meant was that retailers got very, very lean. There was very, very little wiggle room. It was brilliant for consumers because the price of their basket went down. But it also means that now there is less chance for retailers to be able to absorb those costs. Now that is actually exacerbated by COVID, because We have seen for the first time that some big retailers' profit margins have gone under 1% because of the extra safety measures, because of the extra staff they need, because of the investment that they've had to make in things like delivery and click and collect. A lot of retailers are now where they wanted to be in 8 years' time. And you got to remember, neither COVID nor Brexit have started these changes, but what they have done is accelerate them. So where are we at the moment? Well, we're in a brand new world, a new trading relationship. And if you look at the papers and what the politicians are saying, it's very, very different. So we have had the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland say that there is no border down the Irish Sea, and everything is going swimmingly. And we've also had people like the DUP said that we have empty shelves and everyone's starving in Northern Ireland. As usual, business needs to be pragmatic, and where the truth lies somewhere in between. On the food issue, we have the average supermarket has between 40 and 50,000 product lines. There has only ever been about 300 or 400 products that have been missing, and that is not only because of the new regulations and the new systems and the new way of trading, but also you got to remember that EU to GB didn't happen for 7 days because of COVID. And also, usually at this time of the year, we will have slight shortages anyway, because at this time of the year, 90% of our fresh lettuce, 85% of tomatoes, and about 65% of our fresh fruit and veg is coming from the EU anyway. So any little delays actually reduces the shelf life, and some of it just doesn't make it. So there have been challenges. The fact is that retail and logistics have worked together. They've worked every hour God sends, and they've worked with wonderful people like Elly, who you'll hear from later on, to make sure that we can get things, to make sure that our shelves are full, to make sure that deliveries happen. Now, that has come at a cost. And again, as I said, neither the Northern Ireland consumer nor the retail industry really can afford to absorb those costs long term. So it is not as bad as many people made out. It's not perfect. There are a lot of challenges, but I think that the best way of putting it is business is coping. You know, no one's making billions of pounds. No one is going under, but there are those who are struggling depending on what industry you're in. Going forward, we really have a bit of a perfect storm. I hate using that, but it's such a cliche, but there is a bit of a perfect storm coming in April. On the Brexit stuff, we have the end of the grace period for parcels. We have the end of the grace period for export health certificates. And we also have the possibility of hospitality, schools and services all opening at once. Now, that means that there will be a lot more pressure on the supply chain. That means that there is more room for error. And that means that there are possible delays and, of course, possible costs. So what does retail want? Well, it's not just retail who's asking for this, but this is the whole of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group. And we've tried to sort of summarize it in 4 key things. So the first one is stability. And by that, we mean short-term stability to allow people to adapt and allow people to cope. And that means an extension of those grace periods. Give us a breathing space, allow us to adapt. Secondly is certainty. We need long-term workable solutions that have to be done with business, not to business. That means that the EU and the UK need to work with us on this. Thirdly, possibly most importantly, is simplification. And that is simplification of the processes. That's things like a trusted trader scheme. I hate using that term. What I prefer is an auditable and certified supply chain, because trusted trader means different things to different people. But auditable and certified supply chain is what we're looking for. But also simplification on things like the digitization of those checks, etc., that paperwork that is needed. Even better, if it was able, because of the lack of risk and the principle of dead end host, if those could be removed. And lastly, and above all, is affordability. And that's not just to keep Northern Ireland business competitive, but that's also to keep prices down for Northern Ireland consumers. We're going to continue working. We're hopefully going to be making, not only with Michael Gove, but with Vice President Šefčovič, I'm trying to say it properly, in this next few days. And we will continue to make sure that the voice of Northern Ireland business is heard. Thanks for your time.
Fabulous, thank you, Aiden. And I think we had the best impression so far I've heard of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland at least outside of Whitehall. Fabulous. Thank you very much. You're very welcome. And then we come, of course, already set up beautifully by Aiden, who's clearly an absolute pro, to Ellie, who is a key force for good in this space and has worked tirelessly for months and years around some of these issues. So Ellie, you're very welcome. Ellie's from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And Ellie, would you mind just introducing yourself and saying a few bits and pieces about how you see and have seen things evolving?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, as James has kindly introduced me, my name's Ellie Patterson from HMRC. I lead our Northern Ireland stakeholder engagement team. And as part of that, I've been involved in the development of all the guidance and the engagement that HMRC has been doing around the protocol for some time now, and sort of seen firsthand the kind of, and heard from businesses about some of the challenges and the and the work that has gone into ensuring businesses are ready, and actually kind of the start of the new processes that come around because of the protocol. So sort of some reflections from me in terms of where we are. I think one of the things I would reflect upon first is I think one of the key areas of the protocol that I know that businesses still need to hear more from HMRC from and want further guidance on is around the at-risk goods process for goods moving into Northern Ireland. It sits together with things like the free trade agreement that the UK has with the EU, but also in the context of imports into Northern Ireland from the rest of the world, with other kind of trade agreements that the UK has and the EU has with other countries. And putting those things together, I think for me is the key thing that businesses need time to get to grips with. The thing I will say about it as well, though, from the perspective of HMRC, is we are working on further guidance and to help businesses better understand these processes and how they do all fit together. Just to kind of give you a bit of an into that, the joint committee decision, as you'll be aware of, was only made in December, and the trade agreement signed right at the end of December, just before all this came into place. So we are quite quickly doing the piece of work you would normally do before you launch a new policy or a new set of requirements and processes, where we do a lot of the thinking about the detail of how it exactly works, where HMRC's lawyers interpret the legal text that was agreed and actually put that into what does this mean for actual businesses and in these real life scenarios. So we are doing this kind of as businesses are actually also trying to implement these processes. And that's not to kind of make an excuse, but it's just to help people understand why we don't have absolutely all 100% of the detail, particularly on things like the UK trader scheme, which is the scheme to be able to authorise to be able to declare goods not at risk as they enter Northern Ireland, because some of those more detailed questions about precisely kind of the definitions and what it means in certain circumstances are things we haven't yet had a chance to work through. So one thing I do really appreciate is a lot of people have sent in to me via Aiden and other trade associations and the BRC and others, is a lot of really interesting good scenarios that help us to understand how these things need to be actually implemented in real life, and actually helping us to work through different scenarios and understand where further guidance is needed or where refinements in our guidance is needed, and actually allow us to do that in a way that hopefully means that there will be more guidance that's really helpful for businesses in understanding that. We have also been working with the Trader Support Service, which you will know is the government's free of charge service to support with both the process for making declarations for goods going into Northern Ireland, as well as providing education and support on webinars around a number of different areas. And that has included recently at-risk goods and how that fits together with rules of origin and the UK-EU trade agreement in particular, how that can be used as goods move into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. And the thing that came out of all of that for me was very much that is an area where there is enormous appetite for businesses to understand more, but also it is a complex area. So there is, I don't think we are fully there yet in terms of helping businesses and supporting businesses with that with that process. So it is something that we will be looking for further opportunities through organisations such as the Chambers of Commerce, but also through other routes into business to help businesses work through, in particular in sector-specific scenarios, what this means for the kind of goods processes that they have and the kind of considerations that they need to make. And actually building onto that is another area where, again, I think this is an area where we are looking at both more educational materials as well as guidances. If businesses are confronted with complex situations around things like origin, in particular, where, for example, and this is a really common example that we get quite a lot, where goods come into Great Britain, are imported into Great Britain from rest of world, and then in the subsequent movement from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, the origin of those goods could mean that they can't use the UK-EU trade agreement to claim a zero tariff on entry into Northern Ireland. And you then have some, for certain types of business, there are complexities around whether they can or can't declare goods are not at risk using the UK trader scheme. And then that brings into, are there other customs processes that can help those businesses whose goods would be at risk on entry to Northern Ireland and might otherwise need to pay the EU's tariff to mitigate the charging of those tariffs? And there are customs processes that can help businesses in those areas. Things like the use of customs warehousing, which allows goods to be stored in without being declared into free circulation, so that can be done later on, or the use of the transit processes if goods are coming from the EU or another country that's signed up to the Transit Convention. Also the use of things like return goods relief, which can be really helpful for businesses who bring goods from the EU into Great Britain and subsequently move them into Northern Ireland to be able to claim relief from any potential tariff on entry to Northern Ireland. So there's more we can do to help support businesses here in thinking about. There's a number of things and different options that could apply. Not all will be applicable to every scenario, but there's quite a lot of things to work through in terms of what's the best and simplest option for the business that I have, in terms of working through those options and deciding which suits me best. And some of this comes into kind of a lot of the questions we get around things like, what's the evidence I need to have for that? What's the proof that I need? What kind of documents will HMRC want to help support the use of this particular process or that claim? And so we are looking at what more we can do to help both simplify that, but also make it clearer for businesses to understand what's involved in these different processes, because that's part of assessing which process is best. A really simple example of that might be if you are a business moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and your goods have UK origin, so they can take advantage of the UK-EU trade agreement on entry to Northern Ireland and therefore claim a zero tariff, and therefore they're not at risk. Equally, if you are a business that is authorised under the UK trader scheme, you might be able to use that to declare your goods not at risk and no tariff is charged. So two options, which come to the same outcome. No tariff is charged on the goods moving into Northern Ireland. You have the choice though, and so which might be better for your business could depend upon things like how easy is it to demonstrate origin of the goods to be able to use the trade agreement, or actually if you just have an authorization with the UK trader scheme and you know where your goods are going once they come into Northern Ireland. For example, if you're a retailer stocking a retail store, it may be simpler to simply use the UK trader scheme and declare goods not at risk using that, even though you have more than one option that is available to you to achieve the same outcome. So just to sum up, it's I think where we want to do more is about helping businesses to understand these choices, work through the choices, and be able to better consider taking into account all the things that are required for different choices, which is best for them. So that's really the main thing I wanted to cover. I will just briefly mention, picking up from what Aiden was saying about the work that's been doing since Michael Gove wrote to his opposite number in the Commission about the need for, or the desire for further easements to assist with goods processes for Northern Ireland. These cover a number of areas, but really crucially, the question around the processes required for parcels movements into Northern Ireland, but also things like the application of tariff quotas. So I mentioned this merely to say that, yes, that work is ongoing. As Aiden has referred to, there is a lot of work going on with both industry members, but also in government on this. So we don't yet have any outcomes that we can share on that yet, but as soon as there is more, then obviously this will be shared via the Chambers of Commerce and other industry groups, so we can keep people as informed as possible. So thank you.
No, thank you very much, Ellie. That's fascinating, and I feel your pain in terms of the late December deadlines. I think, along with everybody, we were passionately in favour of a deal until it got to about the 24th, when I was passionately in favour of Christmas, and alas, it landed, and that slightly knocked a lot of our plans. But I think it's going to be a really good opportunity to demystify some of the issues and maybe explain some of those flowcharts you must have in your head and on bits of paper almost constantly. So thank you. And then our final panelist from the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, who are probably the most passionate and expert government wranglers within the chamber network, certainly amongst them, I should thought, is Brendan. And Brendan is an international trade expert who has been helping businesses of all sorts and shapes and sizes in NI, and I think also in GB, to do that kind of bilateral trade. Brendan, how have things been for you for the first 6 or 7 weeks? Presumably plain sailing, easy, everyone understands everything. It's all gone tickety-boo, I imagine, is the answer.
Yeah, exactly. No, we're getting the same sort of questions that everybody else is getting. We're getting a lot of questions as to how things are working around GB to NI and bringing stuff in just from GB, from Europe itself. So I'll just kick off with a few wee words about myself then. Thanks, James, by the way. I'm delighted to have the opportunity here to connect with you with the hot topic of GB-NI trade. So as you mentioned yourself, I'm a Customs and Trade Advisor here at the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce. I joined at the end of last year in Q4 to help support our Customs Advisory and Processing Service. Prior to that, I spent 6 years doing imports and export customs requirements for key corporates here in Northern Ireland, and working for a forwarder. So for the Northern Ireland Chamber now, well, throughout 2020, we saw a lot of activity within our international events and training, as a lot of Northern Ireland companies sought to get up to speed with understanding the Northern Ireland Protocol and what it meant for their company in practical terms. Moving into 2021, our business continued to get to grips with the operational requirements of post-Brexit trade. In terms of interaction, we're doing a lot of advising and signposting them to the likes of HMRC and any additional information that they'll need. We've been connecting with the wider BCC network with regards to GB chambers as well, and trying to make their process of moving anything over from GB to Northern Ireland as seamless as possible. Easier said than done sometimes. With regards to the Northern Ireland Protocol, I'm not going to go deeply into it, we don't have the time today, but in a nutshell, it just serves to have free trade have a trade flow easily between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and also with the wider EU. And this has created then obviously a border across the Irish Sea. For GB traders, for a standard process, there's just a few extra processes with regards to entry summary declarations, simplified frontier declarations, and supplementary declarations, which are filled in at the end of the movement on the 4th working day of the following month. So you've obviously, as Ellie mentioned as well, you've heard of the TSS scheme. So this is obviously a governmentally funded one, which is free of charge for the next 24 months. But here in the Chamber, we're sort of encouraging our members to have a look at some customs processes themselves. So it gives you a wee bit more value added due to the fact that you can deal one-on-one with them. So what we're seeing is that Northern Ireland businesses, as Aiden mentioned, are resilient and they're getting on with the protocol. There's no doubt that there's challenges with respect to the administrative burden in terms of paperwork, time, and the associated costs. But we're seeing also that there's a skills requirement for companies in the intermediate market in terms of logistics and customs staff, and that there need to be some education required for both supply chains and customers due to understanding Northern Ireland's unique position in terms of documentation required for Northern Ireland. We're seeing that risk continues to cause a bit of difficulty is GB traders are trying to work out whether their goods want to be deemed at risk when they land in Northern Ireland, and possible disadvantages around competitiveness with EU traders. But in terms of our conversations with GB-based companies, we're just seeing a few of the common themes. So we're seeing the issue around groupage, which seems to be getting ironed out the further we move through the year. Issues around processing, and then just traders trying to get their heads around the ideas of transit if they're moving up through Dublin. With that, I'll pause. I know it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a feel for the Northern Ireland Chamber, and I look forward to answering your questions.
No, fabulous. Thank you so much, Brendan. And I think you've managed to summarise an incredibly complicated interaction of 500,000 people and some brand new international law in about 4 minutes, which I think not only gets you a prize, possibly gets you a doctorate to the University of International Trade Law. But one of the things you mentioned there, I think, is really important, and certainly I struggle with. I run these seminars as much to help me to try and learn and do my day job as anything else, to be frank. But this is qualifying goods that are at risk. And a lot of the regime stems from that kind of first decision. Can you just help us understand in really simple terms how that is and how it works, and on what a company needs to do to work out whether their goods are qualifying or not, or at risk or not?
In simple terms, whether or not your goods are deemed to be a possibility of moving into the EU market. So just try and work out who your end user is and whether or not you think that there's a possibility that could leak into the EU market. As Elly mentioned earlier on as well, there's a couple of other things that can deem your goods not at risk as well. So if your goods are coming in under a zero tariff anyway, your goods won't be at risk. And if you're part of the UK trader scheme, you can also deem your goods not at risk as well. But then if you can access the preferential origin, if you can prove your goods are coming from the UK as well, then you're deemed goods will automatically be deemed that they're not at risk.
Fantastic. So if I can meet the rules broadly saying that my widgets will stay within NIGB and not enter into the EU zone, then they can kind of operate as if they were in Birmingham or Belfast or Bath or Bristol or any other place beginning with B, and exactly this, I ran out there.
Yeah, because it's
Birmingham or any other place. That's it. So you kind of get it within that system, and it can move within that system. That's it. And a lot of it flows. Now that simplifies it a lot. I wish I could have given you a call on the 24th. That would have made my life a hell of a lot easier. Now that's really useful, Brendan. Thank you. And Elly, coming to you, another acronym that flies around. International trade seems to be known for acronyms. Is the TSS, which has come up a couple of times. Could you just help me just explain what the TSS is, who can use it, and if we've got a question here around it. So companies supplying electrical products to customers in NI, I assume from GB, they're registered with the TSS. Do they also need to register with UKTS? So I've been an extra acronym for valuable money.
I have to say, it is unfortunate we have managed to create a load of new acronyms that all sound very similar and are in processes that are all related to one another, which does nothing to help the clarity of any of these processes. So the TSS is the Trader Support Service, and that's the free of charge service that the government has set up to support businesses who are moving goods into Northern Ireland. So it does two things. It provides education and training to help businesses understand the processes, understand the new rules, get to grips with things like Incoterms, which are international trade terms, and determine who's responsible for making declarations for goods going into Northern Ireland. So it has a really, really important education function, and anybody can access that material. It's on the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy website. Hopefully you can share the link to that with attendees after the session today. And there's all sorts of things in there. There's webinars that have been recorded and placed on that service. There's how-to guides. There's information about lots of different things. So that is a really important offering, and that is available to anybody, as I say, completely free of charge. In addition, the Trader Support Service also will make declarations on behalf of businesses for goods movements, primarily for the GBNI goods flows, but it will also support on the small number of occasions where declarations are required for movements from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. And it's also recently launched a transit offering, which means that if you send your goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and they go via the Republic of Ireland, it has a specific offering that can use transit to do that and reduces some of the administration that might otherwise be involved in that process. And so that's all free of charge. Well, that's available to businesses across the UK, because the people who are responsible for making declarations for goods movements does depend upon those Incoterms, and therefore it could be either the GB sender of the goods, or it could be the Northern Ireland receiver of the goods. And either way, either of those can access the TSS, and any of those, any sectors and types of businesses can use the TSS to support with their goods movements. The other one we have is the UK Trader Scheme, which is, to use the expression that Aiden doesn't like, it is a trusted trader scheme, and you may have seen it referred to in EU Commission literature as a trusted trader scheme, because it is a scheme that was set up as part of the at-risk process. So the process for determining whether goods entering into Northern Ireland are at risk of entering the EU. It was set up as a scheme there that if you are authorised with the UK Trader Scheme, you can have the option of being able to declare that your goods are not at risk where they meet certain criteria. So that is goods for sale to or final use by end consumers in the UK, or goods that are for a business's own use in Northern Ireland. That business can declare those goods are not at risk, and therefore they are UK internal movements and no tariff is charged. There are also some categories of processing where goods intended for certain types of processing in Northern Ireland can also be declared not at risk. So it is really useful for the businesses who move the kind of goods that can qualify for it. Because it is a trusted trader scheme, you do have to be authorised, so you have to apply to HMRC for authorisation with it, and you have to. So once you've got your authorisation, then you can declare your goods are not at risk as part of your declaration. I think the important thing to remember is, just because a business has an authorisation doesn't mean it needs to use it every single time. So some businesses will want to declare all of their goods not at risk. I mean, a retailer is a prime example. They're putting their goods into a retail store in Northern Ireland, all of the goods they are moving in will likely come under these categories that can be declared not at risk. Another type of business might have some goods that could be declared not at risk, but other goods where, for example, if they're going into a processing or a supply chain in Northern Ireland, they don't know what the end use of those goods is going to be in Northern Ireland, so they can't be declared not at risk. So even a business who is authorised needs to make a decision for each goods movement about what is appropriate for these goods, this particular supply. What I would also say is, though, there's no cost or any kind of there's not a lot of process to becoming authorised. So even if you don't think you would need the UK Trader Scheme immediately, you might need it at some point in the future. It's worth getting an authorisation in, because once you are authorised, and you may need to use it later. So there's no harm in having an authorisation, even if you're unsure at this point in time if the goods you move will qualify or not.
No, fabulous. Thank you very much, Ellie. And I took a note of what Aiden said earlier on. You touched on auditable and certified supply chains rather wonderfully there. So, and I suppose your advice is, if you can meet the qualifications or the qualifying criteria, get involved now, even if it's not immediately necessary, because you never know. And Aiden, can you just explain from your perspective, I suppose it touches a lot of the food retailers in particular, what the benefits of that kind of authorization are in terms of checks missed, grace periods, etc., etc. Really it's all about what does it do for me?
It certainly is, and not only what it does for the retailer, but what it does for the Northern Ireland consumer as well. And that's why what we have at the moment is good as far as a grace period. As far as the TSS, we are very happy with that. There's always teething problems with these things. I think, though, that the level of communication that there's been between HMRC, the TSS, and all of the moving parts in this is a credit to everyone. I think what it does, and this is where we have to be very, very clear, that the TSS, the UK Trader Scheme, all of these things, they are not a magic customs ferry, and they're not a magic SPS ferry. They do not solve everything. There is still going to be friction. Where there's friction, there is cost. So, as I said, what we are trying to do at the moment is to adapt to the challenges that are there now. But what we want to see is that simplicity and that affordability that and certainty that comes from a long-term solution. Now, our best case scenario would be that either we had some sort of veterinary agreement or mutual recognition agreement as far as SPS standards that would allow the mitigation of a lot of that risk to the single market. You've got to remember, for the EU, this is about mitigating any sort of risk for the customs union and the single market regulations, and they will protect that viciously. So for us, what the best case scenario would be that sort of veterinary agreement, especially if it was whole UK, which then allowed us to move things without those extra checks. If not, then we're going to need some sort of flexibility that acknowledges the principle of dead end host. And that dead end host principle means that things are going to Northern Ireland, retailers are taking them there, they're going to be sold and consumed in Northern Ireland, and that is it. They're not going anywhere else. Neither can Northern Ireland be used as a backdoor to the UK. And there has to be trust for that to happen. So this, the principle of dead end host, there's also an evidentiary burden that needs to happen. Now, the way supply chains work at the moment, and before the 1st of January, one of the wonderful things about just-in-time supply chains is you could tell within a 2-hour window when something that left the south of Spain with peppers and broccoli and all that sort of thing would end up in a supermarket in Ballymena. You could tell that sort of level. Now, the next step is that sort of traceability, and that's where, again, it's auditable and certified. And that's where the trust is. The trust comes from the certification. So while we are in an area where there, you know, the grace periods are working and the new systems are working and we are coping with the new burdens that are coming in April. And the big thing is if there is divergence, and that can be anything as simple as GMO, herbicides, anything like that has an immediate effect on that Irish Sea border. So for us, it doesn't have to be dynamic alignment, what a lot of people have been talking about in the past, but for us, what there needs to be is a recognition of the lack of risk and that auditable and certified supply chain to allow a trusted trader scheme. I'm going to use it, I hate it, but to allow that sort of scheme to encompass not just customs, but wider frictions as well.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things that it's really important to get one's head around on any of this area. It's not the fact of divergence, it's the possibility of divergence can create that friction. When there's the risk, either side is going to try and police it. Now that makes a huge amount of sense to me, even me. So got to figure out whether we're qualifying goods, and then we've got to work out the regime from there and figure out whether there are certain checks, etc., available, and look at the supply chain and think about the time taken. That all makes a lot of sense. One of the problems, Brendan, you mentioned that your members struggled a wee bit to get to grips with is where it's a movement, GB to NI, that kind of makes sense, but it's when it's routed through the ROI, or I suppose another part of the EU. How is that working for people? You said that's one of the areas that is getting a little bit easier to understand and manage. Is that in practice the friction's breaking down a wee bit, or are we still seeing some problems? Oh, I still have problems with muting. It's only been a year.
The problem of the 21st century. Yeah, it is getting slightly easier. As I was saying, we're just pointing a lot of our members towards the relevant information that they need with regards to CTC movements, as what's known, the common transit movements. So they would be going to an office of export to get a TAD, a transit accompanying document, and moving them up then through ROI up into Northern Ireland then, and that just suspends any duty that they might be payable when entering Dublin, for example.
No, fantastic. That makes a lot more sense. We've had a slightly tricky question, actually, Brendan. I'm going to spring this one on you, or at least it may be tricky. So someone who works for a charity whose products are donated, so they don't have a fixed accountable value for them, but of course they do in terms of potential onward trade, and have been manufactured in lots of countries. Is that an issue that's come up? Or it may be, Ellie, you haven't answered this one, I don't know, so I realise this is a really tricky one I'm springing on everyone, so this may be a pile in, but Brendan, I can see you ready to go.
I might pass this one to Ellie because it hasn't come across me, so I'm going to tap out for this one. This is maybe a HMRC issue.
No, very sensible. Yeah, an HMRC issue is always a good way of describing it. Needn't be taxing. Ellie, over to you.
So is this the charity moving goods into Northern Ireland?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, yeah, okay. So the thing to remember, so I think the first point to consider is customs processes. I would describe customs processes as being a bit like a blunt instrument. It doesn't matter who you are broadly, although there are some small exceptions to that. But if it is a commercial movement of goods, then customs processes have to be followed, and therefore that means that declarations are required. And the fact that it's a charity doing them, sadly for the charity, that doesn't mean to say there's any kind of exemption from the processes that they would need to do. They would need to consider the same things as a business moving goods into Northern Ireland, or particularly a business moving its own goods into Northern Ireland, in terms of what they needed to do to comply with declaration requirements. So what I would say is that the TSS is there. It can support with this. It can provide support to a charity as much as it could to another type of business. There is a specific part of the UK Trader Scheme that actually accounts for charities who bring goods into Northern Ireland where they are going to be processed before that something else is done to them, which allows them to use the UK Trader Scheme to declare that goods are not at risk on entry to Northern Ireland, where normally goods for processing in Northern Ireland would ordinarily be at risk, but there is a specific category that the charities can use to use that scheme. So there are options that are available to charities, but broadly I would say a charity, the same as another kind of the same as a business, needs to consider what it's doing, look at the rules and work out how they need to apply to the movements that it's doing, but access the TSS, because obviously that is a free of charge support, so it will help mitigate any additional costs arising to the charity.
No, fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. I guess that's it. It's very difficult to look at the nature of the organisation. You have to look at the nature of the goods. I suppose that's just a fact of life and one of the new difficulties. Yeah. And another question that comes up. Sorry, Ellie, I'm going to come back to you probably more with your revenue than your customs hat on, I suppose, at this stage, which is around VAT and the risk where you've got some EU to GB to NI movements of people seeing or feeling a risk of what's known as double duty, which, given single duty, can be pretty terminal. Double duty feels doubly bad. You know, is that something that the HMRC have got a vision on? I understand there's a lot of qualifying reliefs, and it may just be people don't quite know that they're applicable at this stage, or is it actually not something you're seeing?
So you tend not to get a double duty situation with VAT because of the way VAT works. It's a pay and claim, and in importing and exporting, you normally have a zero-rated export, the charging of import VAT, but normally the importer can then claim that back. Where it becomes challenging, where you have goods flows that go between the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain that go via Northern Ireland, is where is the import duty charged and who can claim it back? Because what you do sometimes see the case of is either and this is more richly in the other direction of the GB to Republic of Ireland via Northern Ireland flow, is the VAT is chargeable in the UK and would have to be reclaimed by a business in Northern Ireland using the provisions under the VAT directives to make a reclaim against to HMRC, and that process can be both complicated and time consuming. And it also happens in the other direction, that a business in the UK may have to make a reclaim of VAT paid in the Republic of Ireland to the revenue authorities in the Republic of Ireland. And these things add quite a bit of time, cash flow and complexity to the processes. In terms of the direct GBNI goods flows, that should be relatively simple, because although technically under the law that is treated as an import flow because of the protocol and what it does, we are continuing to operate VAT in most circumstances as if it were a domestic movement. So seller charges VAT, puts it on their invoice, buyer, assuming they're registered for VAT, can reclaim the VAT, and therefore VAT works much as it does as always and ends up with the final consumer. The complications come when you have movement of own goods, where there may need to be a self-supply for VAT purposes. So for those direct good flows, it should be simpler, but the complexity definitely arises if you've got a via somewhere else, and therefore you might need to think about what reliefs might be available, or where you might need to make a claim to the Irish revenue authorities in respect to VAT that might have to be paid there. And obviously then there's that to think about as well.
No, thank you, Ellie. And I think you hit the nail on the head where it's probably quite complicated to think through if you're a widget manufacturer who's never had to deal with this kind of stuff. And
yes, definitely.
it's probably hopefully slightly easier for a VAT specialist who's selling services. And we're still slightly waiting for the details, but I would point everyone who's on the call to the announcement late last week from the Cabinet Office of a new fund of around 25 million to help some firms, SMEs in particular, understand new trading requirements. I think it's about £2,000 per company. You can help to get some advice. So that is very much, I think, set up to deal with these kind of queries and to help a wee bit, because I'm afraid to say you won't always have Ellie answering my damn full questions to help. Aiden, and you pointed to the grace periods, which are coming up. So we've got a big crunch in April, which will be a month after the budget, which will be interesting, and then a slightly smaller one another 3 months after that. On the assumption that these happen, and obviously there is, there are reasonable arguments that they should be pushed back, and I think there are probably reasonable arguments that you might associate yourself with. But how can companies start planning now for these secondary and tertiary bumps in the road after hopefully just done pretty well to weather a pretty big primary bump?
I think the main thing is to keep engaging with your trade representatives, and for example the Northern Ireland Chamber or the British Chamber. I think information is key in this, and how so any of the businesses that are successfully adapting, this is economic Darwinism is what we're seeing at the minute. And it is not those people who are strongest or have the biggest war chest. It is those people who are fleet of foot and who are able to adapt quickest. Now, to do that, you need to be on top of the information that is coming through. The fact is, the worst case scenario for this sort of thing is that we do not get an extension to any of the grace periods, and we do see those export health certificates come in, for example, or we see the partial rules changing. We don't know what those partial rules are going to be. No pressure, Ellie. We do know that what export health certificates are and how much they cost. Now, as far as the movement assistance scheme, MAS, is coming into place, we don't know what the budget is for that. But we do know that there at the moment it's £150 per EHC, excluding VAT, is what the government will pay to that. However, what I would be looking at is if you are going to need that, who are your vets? Who are going to be the people who are signing that off? Are your logistics guys aware of the new changes? How are they going to deal with either digitization of them or carrying them? And again, these are all the conversations that you had in December. You're basically going to have to do them again with the new information. Now, if you're already on this call, you're still doing better than some people. So for me, that is the main thing, is to be aware where the weak links are, where the possible pressures are going to be, and then just keep abreast of the information. While I'm on, Dominic here had said what I'm talking about, an AEO scheme. It needs to be wider than what AEO does. It also needs to be simpler. So the average time to get on board, and there's a cost to it as well, the average time to get on board with an AEO scheme would be about 18 months. We simply don't have that. Neither do a lot of SMEs have the ability to engage with that sort of scheme and that sort of evidentiary burden. So we would have to make a simplified sort of AEO scheme. Same principle, but a lot more simplistic.
Oh, fantastic. That makes sense. We need a simple type of AEO, not capital AEO, lowercase, which I always like. That makes a lot of sense, Aiden. Thank you. And yes, one of the things we've seen across a range of fronts is it's amazing how important vets are in all sorts of industries. I don't think anyone quite got a handle on that even 12 months ago. I mean, we know they're expensive, but they're very important. Brendan, I'm going to come to you now. We've had a query here, so I'm going to read it out verbatim. One of our customers has been advised that they can no longer ship to NI because they have no EU importer arrangements or EU address on packaging. Is that correct? Is that a situation you've heard of or come across, or that feels a little bit unusual to me? But
With regards to that, from a GB to Northern Ireland perspective, you should be able to ship everything okay. But it's worth noting that when you're doing the movement, that both the XI and GB EORI number need to go on the movement reference when it's coming across, because they're accessing two systems. So one system's accessing the GB side, and the other system's accessing the EU side.
No, that does make a lot of sense. If we stumbled across a pretty big hole, I think as the GB left the EU, so none of our businesses could get an EU address, I'd worry about that. So I would suggest look into that one again. So, Ellie.
James, I was just going to come in and say that might be a question about product labelling.
Okay.
So it's not something I can talk to in any detail, because it falls outside of HMRC's area of responsibility, but it is, I know it can be quite, there is complications around the need for EU addresses if you sell products in the EU as part of product labelling requirements. There is guidance on gov.uk on that. If not, then you may want to put anybody who's asking a question around that in touch with BEIS, because it's their area of responsibility.
Fabulous. I do that as well. Most of my life is basically giving people BEIS email addresses. Duck. Please don't CC me in. No, Ellie, that's really helpful. And a further question that's come in, really, which I think is an interesting one, and it's around repair of goods. So in this case, someone has sold a concrete mixer, let's say, and that comes with a warranty. So you've got a mix kind of services and good, and something goes wrong with it, or it needs to be returned to GB to be repaired. How is that treated? Are there specific problems, requirements around that? Or is that a kind of situation that can get through? This has come in as a question on the from one of the audience.
So I'm assuming that the concrete mixer is in Northern Ireland. It needs to come back to Great Britain in order to be repaired, and once repaired, it needs to go back into Northern Ireland again. So it could be a little bit complicated depending upon the processes that you wish to use. So I think the kind of base point is that under the rules for declaration requirements, the movement of the goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, when it goes back, will need to have an import declaration. And then the question for me then on that one is, would it attract a tariff? Because if no tariff would be applicable, then all you're doing is making the declaration, and you don't need to worry about specific customs processes that might be needed to facilitate with not charging a tariff. So I'll draw an analogy to try and help illustrate this, but normally if you had goods that were in, say, the EU, you brought them back to Great Britain for repair and then sent them back to the EU again, the thing you would be considering is, you've got to do declarations. You'd be thinking about how you mitigate tariffs. Now, because Northern Ireland is different, you don't necessarily need to think about it in exactly the same way, because the Northern Ireland to GB goods flow will be covered by the unfettered access provision, so there will be nothing to do. When the goods go back into Northern Ireland again, assuming that this is something that is being used for business use in Northern Ireland, you should be able to use the UK trader scheme to merely declare that it is not at risk. And that would be simpler than trying to use another customs process to mitigate tariffs, because that will just create that no tariff outcome. Or if you could use the trade agreement. The complication comes if you can't do that and you need to use a different kind of customs procedure in order to mitigate a tariff as the goods enter Northern Ireland. Because a lot of the processes you would use, you would need to have known about in advance of the goods leaving Northern Ireland to be able to set that process up. So what you would probably have to do is export the goods out of Northern Ireland using processing relief, and then so you could put them back into Northern Ireland again under the same customs procedure. So for me, I think it's two steps. It's first, could you use the UK trader scheme to simply mean that the goods are not at risk when they go back into Northern Ireland? If that's the case, then that would be the simplest thing to do. If you can't, then you need to think about what other customs processes may be available, and you probably need to set that up before the goods leave Northern Ireland, because you are probably looking at something like a processing relief.
No, thank you. Can you just the processing relief? Can you just the nutshell's guide to that very briefly, please? Sorry.
Yeah.
If it isn't possible to simplify, please do say that.
Processing reliefs are, the reason I say you would use that as a second thing is processing reliefs are more complicated. So you have to be authorized, you would need to have a guarantee, and it requires more declarations than you might do otherwise. Essentially, what a processing relief is doing is you are moving goods in duty suspension. Now, normally you don't need to do that for goods moving from Northern Ireland, Great Britain, but you're doing it so that you're setting up ready for when it goes back again. So it is more complicated. But essentially what it allows you to do is move a good under duty suspension, repair it or do something to it, do some processing to it, and then move it back again. So that's effectively what you're doing. It's just a slightly unusual way of doing it. And you would only do it if you think you would have a tariff impact as the goods go into Northern Ireland subsequent to being repaired.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm thinking a lot of some of the earlier things you said. There's a lot of ways to the same point. It feels a bit like Occam's razor. Try and find the simplest one and also avail yourself of.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that there's a lot of things that you can work through as different options, that some of them are really quite complicated. But if the option is that or paying a tariff, then you weigh it up, I guess.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's fabulous. Well, this has been chaired appallingly. Largely because I found it so interesting. So I've not really left us enough time for a proper summary. So I'm afraid we've got 1 minute each for summing up. I'm going to come first to Aiden, I think. Aiden, can we have your 1 minute summary of the most complicated trade deal in history, please?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that needs to happen in a short amount of time. There's a lot that needs to happen bilaterally with the UK and the EU, and we're going to continue to ask for that things. And remember, it's that stability, certainty, simplicity, and affordability. But there are other things that the UK government can do unilaterally. I think one of the things that there's been a lot of things that I've been quite happy with. The one thing that I haven't particularly is the fact that there was millions of pounds telling people to get ready to trade with the EU. There was very little spent on get ready to trade, GB businesses get ready to trade with Northern Ireland. I think that is something that we're going to have to do over this next few short months, because Northern Ireland is open for business. Northern Ireland has some advantages. We just need a bit of stability and a bit of time to get used to this new system.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Braden. And similarly, Brendan, over to you. I think we'll give Ellie another 30 seconds or a minute to catch her breath, since we're throwing all sorts of nasty relief questions at her. Brendan, your observations to date and how you think it might evolve a bit, please.
Yeah, I just think that over the course of the next number of years or so, it's just going to evolve into different things. But just for me to echo Aiden's point earlier on, I think the best thing for Northern Ireland businesses to do, and they are adaptable, is to just engage with their supply chain and have a look at what the processes are, especially if these grace periods do run out and we don't get any extensions to them. I would highly recommend that they have a look at what way their goods are moving and engage with their supply chain, and just to make sure that everything moves as smooth as possible in the future, and engage with the likes of the BCC and ourselves here at the Northern Ireland Chamber, because they do have departments that are dedicated there to help businesses work around these problems that are coming up.
Brendan, I think that's fabulous, and never has there been more of a need for enlightened self-interest and working together and collaboratively rather than competitively, again within lawful boundaries to kind of work through some of these tricky questions. Sorry, clearly I spent too long in Whitehall always adding that. And Ellie, over to you for your final observations, thoughts, and perhaps a quick heads up on any simplified guidance that might be coming people's way in the near future.
So yeah, thank you. I'd actually say that what both Brendan and Aiden has said is very, very right. It is about a process of adaptation, and I do think it's right that we do need to be doing more to speak to GB businesses as well, to really help them engage and understand with what it means to trade with Northern Ireland, so it's not seen as a barrier and businesses can continue to trade with Northern Ireland. But I think Brendan makes a really good point as well. It's about adaptation and about businesses not only understanding how the new processes apply to what they do now, but also thinking about, is there a way I could do things differently that would make this either simpler or cheaper, or do things in a different way. Unfortunately, I don't have any definite dates to be able to give any heads up on specific guidance. What I will say is there will be new guidance to help you with the application of rules of origin and the at-risk goods process for goods going into Northern Ireland. And there are other areas that we are still working on closely, and we will be trying to help with more guidance as soon as we can, particularly around areas of the things like the UK trader scheme and how that works. So it is by no means a case of what you see now is everything that's ever going to be there. We are still working on more assistance, more support to help businesses with this.
Fabulous, thank you, Ellie. And if ever there's been a question of it being a journey rather than a destination, I've not seen a clear example. Well, at that point, I think we're going to have to call Stumps and draw it to a close. Very rarely anything I chair do we get all three panelists saying exactly what the other one said, but in different and subtly interesting ways. So I guess that's a milestone of sorts. No one's trying to kill anybody. That's always a very good sign as well. I personally have found it remarkably interesting and fabulously educational, so thank you very much. I now have no excuse for all the really simple mistakes I make when we talk about trade policy, which is a complicated and difficult area. One of the questions we didn't get to explicitly was around the sources of information and help on this stuff, and there are many, and I'm just going to point to a couple at this stage. So as people have said, do look at the gov.uk website. And also talk to the Trader Support Service and UKTS if you can. I know that HMRC have also very good online presence and some call centre type stuff, and I think they have some pretty tight SLAs, because I remember talking to the Cabinet Office in quite punchy terms in middle of December. But obviously they can be a bit busy, so it might involve hanging on. But finally, I would also say, of course, do speak to your Chamber of Commerce. I'm not the first one to say it. Thankfully, Aiden said it first as well, so he gets the brownie points for bigging up my organisation. But also, of course, NIRC, who Brendan mentioned, who are a superb resource and can really help on a lot of this stuff. So look, it's been fabulously interesting. I want to say thank you to all the panelists who have been excellent and superb and done a fabulous job of simplifying what are some horrifyingly complicated bits of the law. And I would say that over time, companies, it can feel very daunting, but I think people are already adapting and finding ways through. And that's companies of all shapes and size, but it may be a slightly tricky process. The final thing it is for me to say before I wish everybody a good afternoon is just a quick reminder that the next one of these webinars is in just over a fortnight's time. That's on Tuesday, the 2nd of March, where we are moving from NIGB as a focus to looking a little bit more incorporeally. So we'll be looking at data and services, and hopefully we'll have some interesting and good news to talk to you about on the data adequacy agreement. But I am going to tell everyone that is time, nearly only 3 minutes over, which, considering I was the chair, is pretty good going. So without further ado, I'm going to say thank you to Aiden, to Brendan and to Ellie, and to wish everybody a superb afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.